Hello and welcome to Bibliophilia. I'm Becca Chavez, and today we're discussing the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Hi, and welcome to Bibliophilia. We're back with Kiyomi again.
Hello.
To talk about the final book in our Bronte run, which is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. Okay, so Anne Bronte is the youngest of all the Bronte siblings. She's the one that didn't go to school.
She survived school because she didn't go to school.
Yeah,
unlike several of the other Bronte
how you
sisters.
live through school. You just don't go. All right, so before we do that, let's talk about our sponsors for a second. We are sponsored again by Sexy Pizza. Sexy Pizza is available in Denver. You can find them at sexypizzaonline.com.
Can you order online?
Yeah, you can order online. You can't get delivered to anywhere that's not in Denver. Just so you know, if you're listening and you're like in Pittsburgh and you really want some sexy pizza, it's not going to work out.
That won't happen.
Yeah, but you can come visit and get some sexy pizza, and that'd be pretty good. So the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Do you want to do a 2-minute plot? I'll do a 2-minute plot. How does that sound? Okay.
I did the plot last time.
Okay. Do you have a timer? Are you going to time me?
Oh, do you want me to time? Okay.
Wait. Oh, yeah. Time me. Time me for 2 minutes. Are you ready? Am I ready?
Wait. Ready. Go.
Okay, so The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is an epistolary novel told from the perspective of Gilbert Markham. He's living in his quiet, bucolic little neighborhood when a new tenant moves into Wildfell Hall, which is kind of a rundown place. And at first, everything's kind of cool. She's a widow with a young son. And then all of a sudden, things kind of go awry, and there's all these rumors flying around about her. He thinks she's having an affair with her landlord, and he goes and confronts her about it and discovers, and she's like, "Oh, I have a story to tell you. Here, read my diary." And she like throws it at him. And that's how he finds out that she is in fact not a widow, but a woman who is separated from her husband. She left her husband in the middle of the night. Scandal. And her husband was kind of an abusive alcoholic jerk. And of course, he feels better knowing that, she has a good reason to be alone, and she's not actually like slutting it up with the landlord, who happens to be her brother, actually. So that's good.
So that's good, yeah.
That's good that she's not slutting it up with the landlord. And then they agree that they can't meet again because their passion for each other is so great, and she's a married woman. And then she goes back to her husband, which is quite shocking because he's an abusive jerk. But it turns out she just goes back to basically watch him die. And then she stays away for a while. And then Gilbert goes to find her, and they reconcile and get married, of course. Because why wouldn't they get married at the end? It's a Bronte novel. Well, I guess people weren't really getting married at the end of Wuthering Heights. But, but yeah, it's a happy novel. It's a big departure from what Charlotte and Emily gave us, which are these tempestuous kind of love affairs where it's like a good thing that your boyfriend's kind of a dick.
Yeah.
So this is completely different. So an interesting thing about this book is that it's assumed that Anne based Mr. Huntingdon, who is Helen's husband, the alcoholic jerk, on her brother Bronwell. Bronwell was an interesting character in and of himself. He was a published poet, published during his lifetime, but he really liked to drink. He was never sent off to school either, which was a good thing for him, and because it's where death happens in that family. So
much death.
Or something traumatizing that caused Charlotte and Emily to like go off the
right. Very different books than Anne wrote.
Yeah. So something very weirdly traumatizing. I was thinking about this, and I was like, what could it have possibly been? And I think maybe it's that kind of claustrophobia of being around a lot of girls and like having an imagination. When you're young and you like romanticize stupid shit, like.
But then, like, Anne was really obsessed with, like, gossiping women, which I feel like something that other girls would have picked up at school.
Their ability to gossip?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a big separation between them.
Or maybe because Charlotte and Emily actually dealt with actual girls at school where Anne did not, and just kind of made up how women acted with each other.
Yeah, because they didn't really they didn't really go that far. It's not like the Brontes.
Yeah, but Anne's book is considered more realistic than, or the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Was more realistic based, whereas the other two sisters were more imaginative.
Whatever, totally
dramatic.
A bunch of ghosts on the moors. Yeah. Right? That's what I'm getting out of this.
Yeah. Tenant of Wildfell Hall was not a Gothic novel.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of ghosts in there, and it's kind of like
why I didn't read it at the beginning.
Okay. So yeah, I haven't read. This is my first time reading through it as well.
Yeah.
It's like because it's just not as romanticized as the other. There's not
where I was like really into
Jane Eyre.
Kind
of super romantic in this way.
In a red room and a woman locked in the attic. Whereas this one was just like, what is she doing with her life?
And then it turns out she has a good reason to be doing everything that she's doing with her life. Yeah. So Bronwell he was born 4th, so he's older than Emily, younger than Charlotte. Mm-hmm. And he was educated at home, which is good for him. It takes you to the ripe old age of, I don't know, it was like 29 or something. They didn't live a long time. But one thing that he did do is he was really into drinking. It's part of it. He went off to go study somewhere. He tried to get into the school, and instead of really going to the school, he just kind of spent a lot of money on booze out in London.
Opiates. He was really into opiates.
Yeah, and he was really into bragging, apparently, too. He was always, the manliest. He was, Hemingway, if Hemingway didn't write anything, it was just, that annoying guy sitting in your bar talking about all the stuff he's done.
Yeah, he wrote poetry that was published, but he never wrote a book.
Yeah, no, I mean, he couldn't get it out. He could write a few poems, but then he drank too. And really the culminate, the pinnacle of all of this, because he was plugging along with pretty standard alcoholism. And then he got rejected by some girl, and that was it.
That
he
pushed
was just
him over the deep end.
Let's go.
And yet people still say that he wrote all the Bronte sister novels.
Some people do. They're nuts. And then it's actually a joke in Cold Comfort Farm that Mr. Mybug is writing a book that tries to purport that he wrote Wuthering Heights, that Bronwell wrote Wuthering Heights. And it's a big joke that obviously that didn't happen because Bronwell's an idiot. But Bronwell is who Anne based Mr. Huntington on. Mr. Huntington.
Which is
Helen's
husband.
Helen is the tenant of Wildfell Hall. Yes. The titular tenant. All right, so titular tenant. So let's talk a bit about the character strengths and character weaknesses within this. I mean, with the two main characters, Helen and Gilbert, because it's really supposed to be a love story between these two. I mean, all right.
Well, I thought it was interesting that the book was also written through Gilbert's eyes, which was definitely different from the other sisters' novels that she went the route to go through Gilbert's.
They all kind of picked interesting Well, Emily and Anne picked interesting narrations, didn't they?
Yeah.
Because this is, okay, for those who don't know, because I said the word epistolary in the beginning of the plot description. An epistolary novel is a novel that is written entirely in letters. So, I mean, it's not like, hey, for a modern reader, Where'd You Go, Bernadette is an epistolary novel. Mm-hmm. So, but, because I don't think a lot of people think about epistolary is an old school word that you wouldn't think about for a modern.
It's not a common narrative either, at least now.
No.
I don't think it was all that common then either.
No, it kind of was, because I think Evelina is also an epistolary novel. And then Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice both started as epistolary novels and became other things.
Well, that was also Jane Austen really liked that form of writing, though, as well. That's how she started writing. Because
of Frances Burney, who wrote Evelina. Mm-hmm. So that's a little literary history there for all of you about epistolary novels. But, so it's all told through these letters that Gilbert Markham is writing to his brother-in-law. And then it's also kind of partially told through the diary entries of Helen, the tenant, because she gives him her diary, as one does.
Yeah.
Frequently.
This story is long and fraught. Here.
Just read my diary.
Read my diary. Because last time that happened, it went so well.
Yeah. So, okay, let's start by talking about Gilbert, which is kind of, do you like Gilbert?
Gilbert seemed kind of whiny.
A little bit.
He just seemed really like, he didn't have much of a drive for anything. He was kind of just like, I'm a farmer because my mother wants me to be a farmer, but I don't really want to be a farmer, but that's what I'm going to do with my life.
Yeah, and it seems like it's weird because he's like, I have too much ambition to be a farmer. But
Yeah,
he never,
doesn't
like,
do anything. And then he's
elaborates
like,
on that.
I'm into Eliza, but then this other woman comes along. So
Yeah.
now I'm not really, I mean, Eliza's okay. She's cool. And we're going to hang out a bit. And then Helen comes along and he's like, well, screw Eliza.
Yeah,
Like,
he's not. Yeah, he's not the greatest.
and Eliza is the girl that,
Eliza's the daughter of the vicar in the town, and she has a sister named Mary. And we'll get into that when we get into like how women are portrayed in the novel, because there's so many female characters, and Gilbert and his brother Fergus are like two male characters early on, and then Mr. Lawrence, who happens to be Helen's brother, is also a male character.
who he lives in the area
Yeah.
and is friends with Gilbert.
Kind of. They're not that close.
Yeah,
and then they become close.
Yeah.
Because
There was a brawl.
that's how you get in with someone's like sister.
You punch him in the face.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I felt like when I was reading Gilbert and reading his story arc, there are some things to like, I guess. Like, he's not Heathcliff and he's not Rochester.
Right.
He's not like emoting
He's
all over
not
the
a complete
place.
asshole.
No.
He's just
He's just not.
the best of gentlemen. But compared to a lot of the other men, like Lawrence was cool,
Yeah.
but like the whole friends,
Yeah, so Mr. Huntington, Arthur,
Huntington gang.
and that gang, like, they suck as men. So that's really like, if you're comparing it, and that, then Gilbert's like a great guy. He's like the best of the best. So I can see that.
but then maybe the Brontes didn't know a lot of great men.
I
I
don't
mean, with
think
their
they knew.
brother as an example, the
Their
other two
dad, I
sisters
guess,
were
was pretty
writing
cool.
around about
Yeah.
horrible men. So they must have not had the great examples.
Like we said before, they didn't get out that much.
No.
They weren't really running
was
around.
Something that women weren't
Yeah.
able to do.
So, what about Helen, the tenant of Wildfell? I mean, when we first meet her, she's presenting as a widow. And so it kind of makes sense that she's a little quiet and to herself. But as you get to know her, like,
She's really into her son. And very, very super protective, which was very strange at the time.
and at first, too, when you read the novel, it's kind of jarring that how protective. She's basically
Right.
like a helicopter parent, modern day helicopter parent. She's like the mother that goes and stands out by the bus stop waiting for the bus to come with her kids. And you don't understand why they're there because they could probably stand at the bus stop by themselves. But
They're like 12.
yeah. Did you like her? Did you? I mean, like, your first impression is that she's a little overbearing, but
I think you hated her more than I hated her.
yeah.
She wasn't. You dislike her for a lot of reasons where I have more compassion for her
Well,
in those situations where you're just like,
okay.
she's annoying. Where I was like, she didn't really have the best situation that she had to deal with.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like, it's not so much that I hate her. It's that she becomes something awful, and I think this is something that happens, like, when you're in these really crappy, awful relationships. Like, you become someone that you wouldn't want to be, like, and I think that's her, because she starts out, like, when you read her diary, because at first she seems kind of distant, but then you read her diary, and she's like, her aunt is really pressuring her to marry these like old dudes who suck. And she's like, I'm not going to marry them. We have nothing to talk about and they're boring and I hate them. And then that's kind of a cool thing to do. But then she marries this other guy. And
who everyone says don't marry, except for her friends who are like, marry for love.
Yeah. And it turns out he's kind of a jerk. And then she kind of becomes this harpy, like.
She's very naggy.
Yeah.
But then also, like, her whole life really sucks because her husband's an asshole. So, like, what else is she going to do but say, stop fucking drinking?
Mm-hmm. And maybe don't cheat on me, please.
Which, telling an alcoholic not to drink isn't really helpful. But, there was an AA at that time.
Yeah, I don't think she really understood. Like, it's never really.
Al-Anons didn't exist yet.
Yeah. They did understand that it was hereditary, which kind of surprised me. Oh. That they talked about that they were like, well, if his father had a propensity to drink, then that's why she basically drugs her son.
She poisons her son so he doesn't drink.
Yeah, really positive. And so when we talk about like how she becomes a harpy, we kind of have to discuss what it means to be a woman at the time, and the ways that she kind of rebels against that, and the ways that she kind of sticks with what being a woman at the time means. So, like I said, she rebelled against her aunt when her aunt was trying to get her to marry those old guys. But at the same time, she's stuck in this really terrible position.
Right. So I think we talked about how like this book was, you had mentioned that this was a more feminist novel.
Yeah, well, no, it's considered the first feminist novel, really.
Yeah, and no one's ever heard of it.
Yay, feminism.
And yet it was, at the time, the most popular Bronte book that was written.
Oh, really?
When it first came out, it was more popular than any of the other Bronte sisters novels. It's one.
That would make sense.
And then Charlotte repressed its reprinting to save her sister's reputation. Or something along the lines.
How would that save her sister's reputation?
There was a lot of negative feedback when this book came out because Helen runs away from her abusive husband, which was something that did not happen at the time. And that, like, I think that, like, really stands out as Helen's character, that she left.
Yeah. That she was strong enough to go elsewhere.
And at that time, because I think in Jane Eyre, you know, it was a big deal when Jane left because she was homeless. Like, she was on the streets, and that was what happened to women when they left.
Well, that's what happened to poor women when they left, because Helen is of a higher social class than Jane.
That's true.
So she has more options, and she goes, and Mr. Lawrence is her brother, and that's why she got her, like, half-brother. They barely grew up to. No, definitely her brother, but they didn't grow up together. She went off with
her mom dies, so she goes and lives with her aunt and uncle in wealth, in splendor. So, and then moves in with Huntington in more wealth. But then she moves to Wildfell, which is
it's fine, right? But this is still nicer than what Jane was doing, which was, like, living on the streets and then going in the cottage.
But she becomes a tradeswoman, which is interesting.
But it's like a classy trade. So she becomes a painter to make some money.
But at that time, a woman leaving her husband and then picking up a trade, like painting for money, like painting was something that you did because you were an accomplished woman. It was just to show off that you had nothing better to do but learn how to paint. Mm-hmm. She used those skills to make money, which was frowned upon. Women making money, their own money.
Yeah. Wildly unheard of at the time. Unless you were a servant. So.
Yes.
And then one of the other things, the reason that she had to do this is because her property really becomes her husband's. When she's given a lot of stuff. When she marries, her uncle gives her a dowry. Her father, I think, leaves her some money, even though she doesn't really talk to her father that much. But they do try and help her, like, get set up in this marriage. Mm-hmm. Because Mr. Huntington has property, but it's implied that he's lost some of it.
Yeah, he's
through reckless behavior.
Gambled a bit of it away and spent it on drugs.
Yeah, but she has some property, but she can't. It's not really like she has an option.
Yeah. It becomes his property basically.
Yeah,
he has control over it.
And so one thing we found out was, because I looked up this divorce thing because we were trying to figure out if she could divorce him, because he cheats on her. That's one thing. There's like this Lady Annabella, who's married to a friend of his, Mr. Lowenbrow, or Lord Lowenbrow, because we can't be misters in the aristocracy. But she's married to Lord Lowenbrow, and she cheats on him. They end up having an affair. Lady Lowenbrow and Mr. Huntington have an affair, and Helen finds out about it. But there's really nothing she can do. And so I was looking up this issue of marriage. And so what she could really do is she would have to prove, like, if he could prove that she was cheating on him, he could get a divorce.
Right.
So Lord Lowenbrow could have divorced his wife, but he chooses not to at first. But she has to prove that not only is he cheating on her, but he's also, like, beating her.
Yeah. She has to have, like, physical proof and then witnesses.
I think just physical proof somehow. And it just seems it's a lot to go through.
It was very hard for a woman to divorce her husband.
Yeah. So it wasn't going to happen. I mean, they could kind of leave. So if one person in the marriage disappeared for 7 years, it was like, oh yeah, that's it. But like he has to disappear for 7 years.
Right.
And then if he comes back, they're like, oh no, this first marriage is the one that's valid. So that's like
So if you get married after that 7 years time and then the dude shows up again,
yeah,
you are screwed.
Have to go back to your first husband, which is so weird. But there was also wife selling, which is like, I just think that's interesting. I mean, I was looking it up and I found out that people used to sell their wives. So, because marriage was considered a contract.
Yeah.
That happened publicly. As long as there was a different contract happening in public, they considered it fine. And this wasn't something that Helen would have done. It
wouldn't have been an option
yeah,
for her.
Because it's
for the social standing.
It's for poor people, really, to sell your wife. And usually what happened was like your wife was having an affair, like was in love with someone else. And then they'd sell you to
so that you could
that person, so you could be happy.
Person's.
So that's pretty nice, I guess, on some weird level.
I don't know if it worked out as a nice thing. Always.
Yeah, I don't think that was...
There's probably a lot of feelings around
divorce
that.
didn't really become a thing until like even 1857.
It wasn't popular.
It wasn't popular. The one character in this book does get divorced, and that's Lord Lowenbrow. Mm-hmm. And that's after his wife leaves him for the second time. And goes running around Europe with her boy toy. Yeah.
It was probably just because it was public.
Yeah. And I think that's it. Because he didn't know about the affair for like 2 years. And then when he finds out, he's like, how could you have kept this from me, Helen? And she's like,
No, it's not like it wasn't obvious.
I didn't want you to get hurt. Anyway. So let's talk about how the women are portrayed in this book. Because there are so many women in this book.
There's a lot of characters. More than any of the other Bronte novels, I feel like.
Because they're not, I mean, like...
Well, there's like 4 families, and they each have like 8 children, or 8 people in each family, and they each have their own story.
And I kind of like that there are so many women in the book, that there's like so many different kinds of women in the book, too.
I'm not sure if there are different kinds of women. I felt like you were either good or you were bad.
And no, I think there's some people who are kind of courting the edge of that good
wishy-washy.
Badness. Yeah. Like okay, so when you first meet Gilbert, he's dating. I don't know. Courting, kind of. He's going on a lot of house visits. How's that? To this girl named Eliza Millward. Millward? What's it? She has a weird name. Eliza Millward. I don't think that's right.
Oh, I thought it was like Wilson.
No, Wilson's a different family. But Eliza Millward.
Millward, you're right.
Okay,
it's Millward.
Okay, so Eliza Millward. And he's kind of going around her a lot and like hanging out at her house all the time. Her dad's like the vicar, and so they're always sitting there.
That's what you do. You hang out with the vicar's daughter.
And she starts out pretty innocuous, and then she kind of, as Gilbert gets to know Mrs. Huntington, Mrs. Graham, whatever, Helen. And his affection starts shifting. I think Eliza's cattiness comes out. I don't think she's a really bad person. She does start a lot of gossip, but I think that's really because she's like
mad,
hurt.
Yeah,
because her boyfriend just ditched her for like no reason.
For a widow with a kid.
Yeah,
that's gotta hurt.
That's harsh. A widow with a kid with a mysterious past. You know, like that's not.
Lives in the rundown house with one servant.
Yeah, who might be having an affair with her landlord.
Ooh.
But she's not, because that's her brother. And that's creepy.
But Eliza's the one that starts a lot of the rumors.
Yeah, I feel like they're a combination. Okay, Eliza's like gossiping with the house staff, with the servants, and that's where a lot of the rumors come from.
Always the servants.
The servants are always causing the gossip.
Causing trouble.
But I think that Miss Wilson, who also lives in the town, is a little bit of the source of some of the... Miss Wilson's an interesting character. So when we talked about Jane Eyre, I kind of mentioned that Blanche Ingram is a basic bitch. But Miss Wilson like takes the basic bitch cake. Like she would definitely be wearing Uggs and drinking a pumpkin spice latte. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I was going to say, there's nothing wrong with that.
Because I love those things. But Like there's no there's no feeling in Mrs. Wilson. So Mr. Markham Gilbert continuously talks about how Miss Wilson is good at like a lot of things. She's like a great singer and she's really she's pretty and
Very accomplished
yeah.
lady.
But she's like so boring. Like, there's just no passion in anything she does.
These Brontes are all about the passion.
And well, too, like I wonder how many people, you know, I felt really sorry for Miss Wilson actually. I know.
We actually felt sorry for a character.
I feel sorry for the character.
I like how you don't feel sorry for like anyone else except for the bitch character.
For Elizabeth, and I feel sorry for Helen on some level. I just think she gets a little whiny. I feel sorry. I actually feel sorry for a lot of people in this book, a lot of the women in this book, and I feel sorry for Miss Wilson because
this book really outlines like how women didn't really have a lot of ability of agency.
Yeah, I feel like Miss Wilson has done all this stuff that she was supposed to do. You know, she learned how to sing. She's pretty. She's got all this stuff going for her. And then it's like, she just, I mean, her only goal is to marry well. And that's just not that doesn't work out for her. That doesn't pan out.
Because she's mean.
No, she's not that mean.
Well, I know she's not mean, but like any character that isn't like super good
I just remember
doesn't end well.
Gilbert sabotages her. He meets because she's chasing after Mr. Lawrence, who's like the landowner in the town.
Oh,
and then Gilbert like meets up with Mr. Lawrence
and
and
goes
is like,
"Well, she's kind of a bitch."
Yeah, he's like, "You probably don't want to marry her."
Yeah, and so he's like, "Oh, okay," and just breaks it off.
Yeah, it's really kind of.
And Gilbert and Lawrence aren't really good friends at that point either.
Yeah, it's
so
really
like, why
weird.
did you decide to like take his word for it?
Don't interfere with other people's relationships. Yeah, and she ends up being an old maid. That's her end because Gilbert.
She's not super good.
Well, yeah, I guess on some level. Yeah.
The super good people end up alive and happy, and the bad people end up dead in brawl fights. That is what happens.
So
everyone bad dies in some horrible way.
So speaking of which, Mr. Huntington. Arthur Huntington, who Helen marries, is friends with this group of men. Lord Lowenbrow's one of them, but he's reformed. But then there's Grimsby, Hattersley, Hargrave, and I think that's it.
That's it.
Is that it? Yeah, because I know that Hattersley and Huntington were driving me nuts.
Yeah, I couldn't.
I don't know why everyone
Grimsley
had
and Hattersley were hard for me to tell apart because they were basically the same.
But So these guys, they're all kind of like hard partying, but of course Mr. Huntington's like the hardest partying. And Mr. Hattersley marries Helen's friend Millicent.
Right.
Do you want to talk about that? Let's talk a bit about how they...
Well, he wanted a wife that was going to be like really complacent and let him do whatever the heck he wanted. And so Millicent was the best choice for him. And she kind of got conned into the marriage.
Yeah, and I think that's like the first sign that like, oh, I want a wife who's compliant. Let's test the limits of this. Yeah. And so she gets conned into this marriage.
Because she doesn't want to marry him because he's an asshole. And she kind of gets that.
This really heartbreaking letter to Helen. I mean, the letter's not in there, but Helen describes it about how she thought she had rejected him.
Yeah. She's like, I'm pretty sure I said no. And
then he shows up and...
He talks to her mother.
Yeah, he's like confident about the fact that he's going to marry her. He talks to her mother.
So her mother basically just comes up to her and goes, so you're getting married, right? And she's like, well, I guess so. Because she's like super good and complacent.
Yeah.
And then he's an asshole to her. But what makes her different from Helen is that she puts up with his bullshit.
Well, it's mentioned like several times that his bullshit isn't as bad as Mr. Huntington's.
Right. It's still though.
Yeah. I mean, like by today's standards, you'd be like, okay, no, this is unacceptable behavior. But and at one point he's like physically abusive towards her too.
And
it's
she's
crazy.
like, yeah, and she's just like, we're not at home, and you're just like, what the fuck is happening at home? Oh my god. Yeah. She's like, please, we're not home. It was just like, oh my god.
Yeah, it was really very scary. Yeah, so her marriage, I guess.
But because she puts up with it, because she's a good woman, puts up with his bullshit, he reforms.
Okay, wait, but let's, okay.
And then they live happily ever after.
Yeah, but
because she's good.
But Helen is like, screw this. I'm leaving my husband, leaves him, comes back to watch him die, and then she gets like a crap ton of money and marries the man of her dreams anyway.
But she's good because she comes back because it's her wifely duty to help her husband die. Because he drunkenly fell off a horse.
Yeah. He was getting better, and then he was like,
yeah, he was getting better and then got drunk and fell off a horse and died. In a horrific way. They all die horrifically.
Yeah, people just died from a lot of horrific things back in the day. Falling
Drunkenly.
off horses.
If you were bad. But if you were good, things worked out for you.
So, this book, does it become like stupidly moral? Like,
and that's what I've been trying to get, like, good or bad. Like,
yeah.
It becomes really moral that if you are good, things work out for you. If you are bad, die in a brawl.
But also I guess because I don't think Gilbert's like all that good. He
does sabotage a marriage.
He does. I just think it gets kind of preachy at some point. I just started getting like really annoyed with Helen because she was like, but you must redeem yourself and go to heaven. And like, you've got to give the guy, like, cut your husband a break here. Like, he clearly doesn't believe in God. Get him something else to believe in. Like, give him anything else to believe in. Like, tell him he should be good for the sake of his son who is standing right in front of him. Like, all kinds of things. But no, she just keeps harping on him about how if he doesn't reform,
Does that also attest to Anne's childhood, though? Because she spent more time with their father than any of the other siblings did. Oh, except for Bronwell.
Yeah, who was being taught by the father.
But he was a clergyman.
I believe you're right. But I don't know.
Is there a possibility? Because the girls went to a religious school. Like, Lowood was sort of based off of the school that the girls went to.
Yeah.
And that could have kind of affected their faith a little, or like how they would write about it.
Yeah.
And
I think
whereas Anne kind of got out of that, so she probably kind of followed a different religious, morally path.
But it just seems too moral to me. That's like the problem. Like, because I think that Jane Eyre talks a bit about God. Mm-hmm. I mean, they kind of leave it out of Wuthering Heights.
Yeah.
I mean, there's Joseph, who's basically making a farce of religion.
Something happened to Charlotte.
But with this book, it just felt like it was, I don't know, you've read Little Women, of course, right? Mm-hmm. So I read that when I was like in 7th grade, and I was like, oh, I love this book. Look how romantic it is. Beth dies. So sad. But then when I got older, like I tried to read it when I was like 27 or something, and I was like, oh, Jesus, this book. Like, it's just people like learning how to be good.
I don't think I reread it as an adult because I don't think I liked it as a child because the characters were too good.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I can't relate to this.
It was like they had like hints of badness, and they're like, oh, I'm going to control my temper.
Yeah.
Because Jesus told me to. And it just got kind of annoying because that was like every single chapter was somebody kind of like, oh, am I going to do the right thing? And that's what I felt like this book was. Like at a certain point was just Anne Bronte like beating me over the head with this idea that I should.
Which was interesting because when the book came out, like people were so incised by the fact that like this woman left her husband and she's took the child and like that was all so wrong. But then the book is also like super preachy. So it was like people couldn't decide on like what they wanted from it.
Yeah. Do you think people in the 19th century are to be trusted with their book choices?
They didn't have a lot of options.
They didn't. They weren't. It was like shortly after the novel. And this is pre-Dickens, too.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Thank you last night for like doing the timeline for me of like Regency because I was very confused.
Let's talk about that for a second because
okay.
We'll talk about when it's set.
Yeah.
Not the Regency. Technically the Georgian era. So what we discovered was that the Regency was a time within the Georgian era, within what's considered the Georgian era. So it was the Georgian era, and then that George died, and his son, the regent, was there as the regent for a while, and that's considered the Regency. But then when he takes over, like the actual crown, it's the Georgian era again. So It's like a weird. The Regency exists within the Georgian era.
But they were two different Georgias.
Yeah.
So Where George and Becca.
Or,
That's
like-
really helpful for naming your kids your name.
Yeah, and now there's like
ruining our
another one.
eras.
There's another George.
Oh yeah, Shh, we're gonna have another Georgian era.
I don't think we do that anymore.
I don't think so either.
Is this the Elizabethan era too?
all over again?
Yeah, the second Elizabethan era. Yeah, I don't think we do that anymore. Plus, I don't think Queen Elizabeth's ever gonna die.
No,
I think she's
a zombie.
she's lived a really long time.
Vampire. How many presidents has she gone through?
Like a lot of presidents. Her son's like getting up there. I don't think he's gonna be king.
Anyways,
Anyway, so this is pre-Victorian. It's set in 1826, but it's written.
it's written in Victorian times.
Yeah, so it's written.
It was like,
Wait, was it, or was it like right at the?
is that like it
I think
bleeds
you're right.
into it?
Yeah, like bleeds in. So it's written. Technically, he like signs the last letter from 1847, but it's set during the 1820s. Really, is where most of the action happens, where the marriage happens, and all that stuff. So different times. They were very proper. They couldn't do certain.
Anything.
Yeah, I mean they couldn't kiss and they couldn't.
Hold
Like,
hands. They went.
They
to
know they were
dinners.
constantly pressing each other's hands
Oh yeah,
because it's very.
that
okay,
was the only thing that you were allowed to do.
yeah. Press someone's hand to you.
To the bosom.
Yeah, so one of the things that happens in here is that because she's such a moral woman, but her husband's cheating on her, Mr. Hargrave comes over and is like, I'm secretly in love with you. You know, we could get down to business and no one would know. And she's like, no, get away from me. Like, this is so gross that you're doing this right now. Because her husband is still alive.
But even though after when her husband dies, she makes like Gilbert go through like this whole year of courting her, like official courting.
But I think that's because her aunt, she was concerned about how her aunt would. And she was in mourning. She was in mourning, right? Well, so her husband died, a year passed, and then her uncle died. And so she was in mourning for that.
Yeah, so it was like this 2 to 3 year period where Gilbert had to just kind of like sit on the sidelines and wait things out
Well,
till proper things were recognized and her morality.
see, and that's why I don't like that's why she annoys me. Like, just go for it. Just, do you think Catherine Earnshaw was really being that loyal to Edgar Linton?
Well,
I doubt it. Who knows who this kid that baby is?
what's so funny about this book, though, is that, like, you know, like I said, like, she ran away from her husband. She did all these things. She became a painter. She made money. She did all these radical things that women weren't doing at the time.
Yeah.
But then, like, she followed all these moral standings.
Yeah,
that
like
were
she
just
had
so
to.
weird.
And that's like where it gets bad for me. And I think, I don't know, I guess that answers the question, what is, or partially answers the question, what does it mean to be a good person? What do you think it means?
To be a good person, I think my idea of being a good person doesn't really compare to what being a good person at that time was, because apparently being a good person at that time was not drinking or doing opiates.
So you but I think
I
the
don't
only
do,
way to
but
be
I'm
a
not
good person
sure.
is to do opiates. No. Yeah, it's weird because that stuff is really demonized in the book, but at the time it wasn't really. I mean, like, you weren't expected to do opiates every night, but it wasn't like it was the worst thing that could happen to a person. Drinking and opiates.
And yeah, it was a common thing to do, but in excess, it was definitely frowned
It was definitely
upon.
naughty.
Because there were people who were like opiate addicts who were in dens of. I mean, the whole dragon lading concept comes from opiate addicts.
But
And
do
like
you
that
think
fear around opiates.
that being like, I don't know, because I don't feel like Gilbert's that good of a person, but he's still in the book. He gets that title of goodness.
Yeah, he gets what he wants in the end, which
and so
only
and I'm not.
happens to the good characters.
Yeah,
Is it the fact that Gilbert is only like the best man standing though? Because like you said earlier, comparatively to the
Yeah.
other guys, he's good, and perhaps at that time that was considered a good guy.
like that he was. I mean, I guess, yeah, he does hurt Eliza's feelings, but it doesn't seem like he does anything like really malicious. He acts a lot without thinking, I think. But I don't know if he's. But like to me, I'd be like, oh, that guy's kind of a jerk. I don't think he's a good person. And like, whereas Helen, I'll be like, oh well, she ran away. She's a good person, even though she ran away from her husband, which wasn't allowed. So I guess what really makes a person good? I guess I get to decide and make moral judgments on all the characters. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you tend to do that.
That's okay.
That's not fine. This is your show.
I get to judge other characters as much as I want. Yeah. Well, what do you think?
What makes a good person?
Yeah.
I think they're all kind of assholes.
Like everyone in the book.
Not everyone, but
little Arthur Jr. is okay.
he's kind of annoying though.
I don't know. I didn't think he was that.
I mean, he was a burgeoning alcoholic until his mother took control
that's
of that.
right. Yeah, he was. I think that's an interesting aspect.
When he was like 8.
Yeah, he was like 6 and they were giving him alcohol and it's like super weird. But yeah.
And cussing at his tender age.
So you think they're all jerks? They're all. That's your judgment that you're passing.
I mean, I think it's silly that Anne Bronte is trying to make us decide on who are these good characters and who are these bad characters instead of just making them human characters, which all have flaws in them.
Yeah. Okay. So like Helen's just a bit too.
Helen's too preachy in her goodness.
Yeah.
Her goodness becomes
obnoxious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are my feelings.
Okay, cool. That's cool. Do you like drinking?
Quite often, quite a bit.
Oh, goodness.
But I've never considered myself a good person. So. All
right. Oh, there's one other character that we should maybe talk about a bit. Esther. Esther is Millicent's sister and Mr. Hargrave's sister. And she is coming of age during the book. So you have all these older characters who kind of get shucked into these marriages.
And by older, they're like 23.
Yeah. Well, they're getting up there. You have all these older characters, and then you have Esther, who's young, and she's Millicent's sister. And she actually lives, her house is next to Helen's house. Like, they're neighbors. And Helen goes over quite a bit because her only other option is hanging out with her alcoholic husband. And he's gone a lot. He's in London.
Yeah, he's in London all the time. She's basically by herself with her kid.
So Millicent sends a letter to Helen saying, hey, can you just tell my sister just marry for love and nothing else? Like, no, she says marry for like a combination of love and reason. Like, figure out a balance.
Yeah.
But don't marry for money. And this is really stressful to Mrs. Hargrave, the mother of Esther, because she's trying to push her into... Mrs. Hargrave is really working hard to make sure that the family has this appearance of
well-to-doness.
Wealth. Yeah. Because it's kind of falling apart. And so she really pushed the wedding between Millicent and Mr. Hattersley. And then she tries to push Esther into a different marriage, but Esther ends up marrying Mr. Lawrence.
For love.
I guess.
But Mr. Lawrence ends up is a good guy.
Yeah,
so they have a good marriage.
Yeah, well, hopefully. I mean, you don't really see much of it.
Know.
Yeah,
we just know that they get married.
Yeah. So one thing I was thinking of when I thought of that with the Hargraves is, Mrs. Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. Mm-hmm. She, her big thing is that she wants to marry off her daughters, and I just think it's just so lucky that Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley are good guys. Like, that's just dumb luck, really. And even when Lydia runs off with Wickham,
yeah,
her response is more of a, oh, at least she's married.
Yeah.
Than it is like...
she's going to be unhappy.
Yeah. And so I wonder, like, it really drives home the point that this it's not all. I mean, like you read a Jane Austen novel and you're like, oh, how romantic.
It's romantic, but it's really just about
but
getting those girls married off.
Yeah, especially Pride and Prejudice is really, really about getting people married off, and that's really disturbing to me. And I think this book really drives home that point.
Yeah, that is in the sense that that's what women lived through at that time, was that they were being forced into marriages right and left.
Yeah,
that weren't.
It wasn't all Darcy and Bingley.
Right. And Helen was trying to be pushed into those marriages with old, boring guys, even though they were really old.
Yeah.
And it was just about getting her out of the house and married and wed.
Yeah, and her aunt kept on saying like it would be the sensible choice to marry one of these guys.
How old was Esther when she eventually got married?
I think she was 19 because she had gone through at least one season out in...
Well, that's 16 is when you come
but
out.
I feel like it was older. It's...
She might have waited because Millicent was so awfully set.
Okay, so because there are different times throughout history too. So in the Regency era, the Jane Austen thing, like one thing is Fanny comes out. They can't believe that Fanny Price of Mansfield Park isn't out at 18 because she should have come out at 16.
And then Lydia, the two younger sisters,
are out too early.
So
and 15.
They were 15 and maybe they were 14 and 15.
Maybe no, because Kitty was 2 years old. So Lydia is really out too early. Really, all of them are out too early because Jane isn't married yet.
Right.
So they were supposed to stay in until.
But the mother really needed to get them married off.
And
that's what happens when you have 5 daughters.
But then you look later on in Gone with the Wind, and American culture is different too. But in Gone with the Wind, the youngest sister, Corinne, she isn't out yet in the beginning of the novel, but they mentioned that she'll be out very soon. She's like 13 in the beginning of the novel, and they're like, you'll be out.
Yeah, Scarlett was like 16.
Yeah, so
she was really, really young.
Depending on what time it was, there were different times for people to be out, and I got the sense, and they all came of age at 21. That is something that I learned from Bleak House, that they come of age at 21.
You need to be married.
But you can be... No. You don't have to be married at 21, but that's when you get your fortune.
Oh.
Yeah. So Jane is kind of old for her, even though she's like 22, so that's kind of old. Jane Bennett. Mm-hmm. I'm like just throwing these names out here. Yeah. Like no one is going to be following along unless they know anything about Austen.
I hope you guys know Jane Austen really well.
I hope you do.
That's our reference point.
And Charles Dickens, I guess, because we're talking about
Bleak
that
House,
too. Yeah. So, but yeah. So I got the sense from this that Esther came out at 18, and then was about 19 or 20 when she got married.
Lawrence is an older brother, so he was probably in his 30s.
Maybe late 20s. Late 20s? Ooh. Yeah.
But anyways, what's your beef with Mr. Lawrence? Why is Esther marrying Lawrence such a bad thing?
Oh, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's okay. I just think that it just surprised me is all. I wasn't expecting that to happen in the course of the book. I actually like Mr. Lawrence. I think he kind of treated Miss Wilson kind of poorly because it was just his friend saying like, no, you shouldn't marry her. And he's like, oh, okay.
I think it was that was also Anne Bronte is just tying up loose ends.
Probably.
It's like, Esther needs a good guy to marry. Well, there's Lawrence.
And they seem happy, I guess.
So they're married now. I
don't know. Anyway, that's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. She also wrote Agnes Grey, if anyone's interested. Youngest of the Bronte sisters. So let's, this is our last Bronte book that we're going to do during this run.
Is Bronte's going to come up again?
They might. So Emily only wrote one book, which is Wuthering Heights.
Yeah.
But
Anne wrote.
Charlotte wrote Villette and The Professor and Shirley.
That's right.
And then Anne wrote Agnes Grey. So there's a lot of Brontes to read that you could read. If you feel like going home and reading, listeners, if I didn't lose you through that whole Austen discussion.
Obviously, there's a passion for Austen. I like the Bronte sisters.
Do you know Charlotte hated Jane Austen? This was like a big
Charlotte hated everything. Okay, Charlotte also suppressed the reprinting of.
But this was like a big literary. This
Tenant.
is like a big deal that Charlotte like wrote this essay that was like, "This Jane Austen. It's all bullshit." Like basically,
No, it
but
kind of was. Though.
She didn't say it was all bullshit, but that was the sentiment expressed.
Yeah, it was kind of bullshit though.
It was. It was just pretty people getting married, and that's kind of why she wrote Jane Eyre, because Jane Eyre is not a beautiful person, and she's not a gentry class. She's not. She's just poor. So there's all that. But that's it. That's our final book for the Brontes for now. And then next week, we actually have no idea what we're doing next week because we had someone, or we thought we had someone, and then he had to reschedule. So it's a crapshoot, folks. Anything could happen. We'll announce it on our Facebook page. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/Bibliophilia podcast. We have a lot of different ones, but mostly I'm just going to send, what I'm going to do is send you to our new blog, which is bibliophiliapodcast.wordpress.com. And you'll find links to our Facebook page and to our Twitter account. And there's one other thing. I don't know. Just go there. That seems like a good place. And we have an Instagram, Bibliophilia Podcast. If you Google Bibliophilia Podcast, you'll find a lot of stuff, hopefully, about us. That's it. Subscribe on iTunes. Sponsored by Sexy Pizza. And then, I guess we'll see you next week. Right? Gabe?
What?
We're going to see everyone next week, Gabe. Thanks. Thanks for listening. Theme music by Joseph Scardetta.